I know if you keep pressing on, you don't have to suffer and you can find it, but it's hard work.
Welcome back to Happiness in Progress. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award winner, former journalist, mom, wife, and just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. On this podcast, you'll hear stories of inspiration, overcoming, and perspective that will help you become the best version of you. This podcast is brought to you by the Mail Tribune. Check out mailtribune.com for more podcasts. And don't forget, if you like listening, do not forget to click subscribe and make sure to give Happiness in Progress a rating in iTunes. Today, we're going to talk about something really close to my heart and really important: mental illness, and not just mental illness, but mental illness in children. Andrea Berryman Childreth is the author of On the Edge: Help and Hope for Parenting Children with Mental Illness. Andrea wrote this book after struggling to find resources in her own journey of raising a child with a neurological disorder and mental illness. She's also the founder of the blog Bipolar Lemonade. In this conversation, she shares her experience, why early intervention is so critical, how you can find a new normal after diagnosis, and some tangible tips to help a child with mental illness cope. So let's start. If you just want to tell me a little bit about your story and why this has become such an important cause for you and a mission for you.
Well, it obviously really started when we started recognizing signs in Chloe that she was having difficulty and socially, behaviorally, emotionally, when she was literally as young as 3 or so years old. And then we finally got her diagnosed when her first grade teacher told me, you know what, like, Chloe, she's glassing out during class. I know she's not comprehending anything, and she doesn't do well with other students socially. And right now it's okay because she's in first grade, but later on it's not going to be. So we sought treatment for her, and she was initially diagnosed with bipolar and anxiety and depression and ADHD. And what we found out very quickly, and what we have found out over the years, is that, one, there's not a lot of resources for mental illness anyways. Mm-hmm. When you're a child or you have a child, you have even less. And if you're privately insured, don't have Medicaid, there's next to none.
Wow.
So that's kind of all the genesis of, I started the blog Bipolar Lemonade. And then out of that came the book, because I started to realize when I started posting on Facebook about it, our story, people just were coming out of the woodwork and were like, oh my gosh, like, this is happening to me, or it's happening to my niece, or it's, you know what I mean? And we don't know how to get help. And I don't really have the answers either, but I'm hoping to, that my book provides a start to those, and people can learn what I didn't know going along the way that I have learned.
One of the things I can see being difficult with this is having a 3-year-old, first noticing behaviors in a 3-year-old, because 3 years old is a difficult age in just about every 3-year-old out there. So
right.
How do you notice the difference? What were you seeing?
Well, I have a mental illness as well, so I'm pretty plugged in. I just am. I'm an empath, and so I really could feel that she was struggling. I wasn't sure what was wrong, but just emotionally I could tell. And I think the biggest indicator for us is we had signed her up for a Montessori school, and she was going, and every day first I'd go to drop her off, and she just was hysterical. She didn't want to go. She was holding on to me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is wrong? What's going on here? And then I'd come to pick her up, and the teacher would be like, she's talking out of turn in circle time, and she's wiggling around, and she gets up and she leaves the group. She's basically not complying, right, with the rules of the group. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't know how to play with other kids and share. She said she stands in the corner with the bunny during recess every day. She, and we try to engage her with the other kids. She can't, or she doesn't, and she walks away and goes back to the bunny. So to me, those are big signs, is one, she's not complying with the rules and staying consistent when all the other kids are just sitting there and maybe they're wiggling or being goofy, but she actually gets up and leaves the group, or she shouts something out during the middle of when the teacher is, talking about something.
Mm-hmm.
And then just her social skills weren't, I guess, in line with what I was seeing with other friends and other kids that were in her Montessori classroom. So
Mm-hmm.
because I have a lot of anxiety myself, I just clued in really quickly. It just took a while to, kind of get my husband on board, because he's like, "There's nothing wrong with her. We don't need, because she was young." And so it took a while to finally, when the teacher said something, I just used that as we gotta
Do
go.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think you could, even at that age with a 3-year-old doing some of those behaviors, I've seen all kinds of 3-year-olds do those kind of behaviors and then grow up to be perfectly, normal adults, meaning not dealing with a major mental illness. Was there something else? It sounds like maybe you had like mother's intuition or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's, I think, the best way to describe it. And because I've been so deeply affected by mental illness, it's just like I could just feel it. I could feel that something was off, and I could, tell she wasn't connecting or clicking. Do you know what I mean? Like, she wasn't getting it. You could just see it, but I didn't really know what it was or couldn't call it anything. And it was actually a big relief for me when we went to a psychiatrist and she got a diagnosis, because it was like, I told you, I knew something was wrong, and I want her to get help, and I want her to get treatment, because we're all like miserable. And as she got older, she became, not just tantrums of a 4 or 5-year-old, but I mean, like, wouldn't stop for hours. Just my husband would try to hold her, and she would, to kind of calm her down, and she would just flip out, and she was abusive to her younger sister, and like really controlling. And my girls are about 17 months apart, and I remember when my daughter, my 3-year-old, Chloe, was, I think, 5, so Sophia must have been about 3.5, and Chloe like went on to this full-on meltdown, and I started to kind of set boundaries, and you can't do that. We need to do timeout, that whole thing. And my 3-year-old daughter said to me, "No, Mama, I know how to stop her. You have to let her do what she wants."
Wow.
Isn't that sad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Like, what goes through your mind when you hear that?
Well, at the time, you're kind of in crisis. So there's not, which is, what happens sort of all the time when you run into those situations where you're in crisis, and so you're dealing with what's happening in the moment. And then later you're like, oh my gosh, right? Like, this poor kid, my other daughter, is suffering too. And she's, got PTSD, and she's doing a lot better, obviously, now that Chloe's gone through treatment. And but she really struggled because her sister controlled her, her whole life. So, like, those things I remember forever, because it was just, so mind blowing. Like, later on, it's like, holy cow, like, this is what she said to me. That a 3-year-old said this to me. Like, she had that much kind of wit and intelligence and understanding of what was going on with Chloe, that she's telling me not to do anything because, and, I'm trying to say, well, no, this isn't okay. This isn't okay. And she's like, she's going off the rails. You need to stop trying to discipline her, basically.
In all of this, what was the hardest part for you?
I think the hardest part really, is kind of part of my message and mantra, is the shame and stigma. Mm-hmm. Unless you've experienced a mental illness or have, had to care for someone with mental illness, people just don't get it. And even healthcare professionals don't get it, so the shaming that we got, even by healthcare professionals, doctors, by the schools, was horrible. I mean, with Chloe, we had her struggling in school. By the time she was in 6th grade, she was dropped out most of the time, except about 30%. and the, school would basically blame us and demoralize us. And, this wouldn't be happening if you guys were parenting her right, all that kind of stuff. And we've got a daughter at the same school who's 2 grades lower than she is. That's a rock star, right? Like, she was getting student of the month every month. She was, getting top grades. She was playing 3 sports. You know what I mean? Like, she was so well behaved. Every teacher was like, "Oh my gosh, Sophia, she's so awesome." La 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 la. So it's like, it's not our parenting, like, something's going on, and no one could help us. Like, they didn't have resources. Now I kind of have accepted the fact that it really wasn't their fault. They didn't have the resources either. I mean, it really wasn't until Chloe went off to treatment when she was 15 that we got a new diagnosis for her and have really started to understand how her brain works. I mean, she's got a neurological disorder, which she basically can't see consequences, like theoretical consequences. Does that make sense?
Wow, yes.
She doesn't see how dots are connected. And even now when I try to explain it, she's a teenager and she's driving, and it's like you're, trying to take control of a feral cat. I still have my friends, or even my sister was here last weekend, and she's trying to fix it all for me. Well, you need to do this, you need to do that. And it's like, it's frustrating for me because I just need them to listen, right? Because there's not anything you can fix with her. It literally is neurological. She's never going to be able to change it. So how do we manage it in the moment?
What are the tools you can teach her?
Yeah, exactly. And that she, trusts us and listens to us as we go through this journey together.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned the resources too. Do you feel like not only the teachers and the schools didn't have resources, but also like the pediatricians that you were talking to?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, mental illness is so kind of on a spectrum. To me, it's all kind of blends together, right? There's different diagnoses, but there's so many comorbid diagnosis, meaning like I have bipolar disorder, but that also includes, the anxiety and the depression pieces of it as well. And Chloe has this neurological disorder, but it also includes anxiety, depression, and ADHD. So it's not like it's just one thing and one thing you can hold on to. And oftentimes, the diagnoses can change through the years, which is what it did with Chloe, because people, doctors, just like you said, or pediatricians, there's not enough research on the brain to know really anything that definitive about it, right? Like, it's not like they have found out with some cancers over the years that if you treat it with XYZ, or this is the way that it behaves if you do XYZ, or you have, your prognosis is at stage 3, you know what I mean, 50, 60%. It's not the way it is with mental illness, and it's behavioral. So it makes it harder because she just looks like she's being a butt. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
and it does. I mean, it's really, really a struggle. Even when you know that she's not piecing things together, it's still like, oh my gosh, like, she's not getting it. Like, we can't get through to her. What do we do? It's not willful. She literally can't piece it together. And so, and in some cases it's chemical for people, and they, can't see their own mental illness. And so you're dealing with someone who doesn't even have kind of the wherewithal to have insight of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So from first grade to now, about to turn 18, do you feel like you've been able to develop the tools that could help her?
Yes. I mean, I think she was in treatment for about 2.5 years, which was really significant because she doesn't have a lot of insight either, because she's not able to, see the kind of the writing on the wall and what happens if you're at A, and you want to do Z, what steps could happen in between, or things, that are risky. So the treatment really helped ground her. And help her understand what her deficits are, so that we're always able to kind of go back to, this is where you struggle and where we need you to trust us and help you out. So there's definitely some really strong tools we got while we were in treatment. I mean, it's a process. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's like we'll be sailing along and everything will be great. And then it's just like, all of a sudden there's this huge bump in the road, and it's like, hello, what happened? Where did that come from? And it's very familiar with what we were going through before we sent her, just not at the same level. I mean, she was getting involved with some drugs and some really dangerous and risky friends, whereas now she hasn't quite gotten there yet, at least. So I hope not. But yeah. So I think so. I mean, we just kind of always try to keep coming back to the values of the family, making sure that we came back together and focused on what was important to us and what was important to her. And
for someone listening, maybe they have that toddler and they're like, something seems a little bit different. What is the point of getting the diagnosis when it's so hard, it's a long game, and it's expensive?
Oftentimes people wait until it's super, super critical that they get a diagnosis. I mean, I would say if, you really are concerned, to go into a psychiatrist or psychologist, because the pediatricians, like you said, they're having to be generalists and often don't understand the brain. Like a psychiatrist says, they hear and learn about it every day, right? And all the changes that are happening and trends and all that stuff. So they're going to be more in tune with that. I think, the reason that we keep pushing on and the reason that we did is because, I guess for me, one is I was, miserable for years, and I didn't understand why. It was I'm 49 years old. So it was way back when Prozac just started coming onto the market. And so I was like, what is going on with me? And I had tried counseling for years and all that other type of thing. And I finally reached out to my dad, who was a physician at the time here, and just said, I can't go on like this. I can't live like this. And so he sent me out some Paxil, which is kind of a cousin to Prozac, and it saved my life. Right. Wow. So it was so profound for me that I'm like, I know you don't have to suffer. Do you know what I mean? So, and I feel that way about anybody. I know if you keep pressing on, you don't have to suffer and you can find it, but it's hard work. And that's one of the things we always try to tell Chloe, life is not easy. We have provided for you your whole life, and you've been lucky, but it's not, as far as kind of financially and being comfortable with life, but life is not easy on its own. If you go off and you got to really work hard to be happy, and you really try to find those moments with your friends and your family that make you happy.
Right.
So it's just, I think it's part of the journey of life, I guess, to me. And what's the alternative? You know?
So I'm thinking about as adults. So you got the medication as an adult. I was in college. I was maybe a freshman or sophomore in college when I was diagnosed with OCD, which was like a huge weight off my shoulders because I was like, oh my goodness, I can handle this now. I know it's not just, I'm crazy. Exactly. I've got a chemical imbalance. So I felt in control, and that was a huge thing for me, a huge step for me. But for kids, why do you think it's important to get a diagnosis while they're young to take action quickly?
I really believe early intervention is so critical for our society, because the longer people wait, the more that the behaviors become ingrained in these kids. They're coping, basically. They're surviving, right? It's a coping mechanism is what they're going through in survival. And they're not good behaviors. It's the only way that they know how to communicate or whatever, may be that they're trying to do, but it's not healthy. And so it just leads from one unhealthy behavior to the next. So kids who, have mental illness are more likely to go on to use drugs, are more likely to drop out of high school, are more likely to get in trouble by the law, end up in jail when they're older, not have jobs. I mean, it's the whole cycle, and we have such little resources for kids, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're almost backwards, someone asked me the other day about the jail in Jackson County that they're going to do the mental health piece up, which I think is like fabulous. I really do, because I think it's at least starting to address the problem. But I was like, we should have done that. It should be on the beginning end of life. It shouldn't be, kind of midway when they've already picked up all these behaviors and now they're addicts or now they're, criminals, and they're trying to relearn or undo something they've been doing for the last 30 years.
Right.
So to me, those resources it's, too little too late, kind of like they're in the wrong spot in our community and life. So that, that's kind of where I am with the early intervention piece, is that it is so critical. And I think it can save families and really our society a lot of money.
Yeah. And when I think of myself, I remember having my first early OCD tendencies as a first grader, but learning the behaviors that I did for must have been about 10 years, how wonderful it would have been to be relieved of that earlier. So I didn't bring that into college and into my adult years.
Totally.
I think that's a great point. Okay. You talk about living with a new normal, and I want to quote this part of your book. It says, in terms of helping your mentally ill child, the first real hurdle is to come to terms with the fact that you and your family are in a new normal. This can be a long and hard process, but as parents, we need to realize that a child who has a mental health condition may never be the same. Our dreams and plans for the future may have to evolve, along with our household rules and other daily routines. If we don't realize and accept a child's limitations, we will constantly run up against frustration, stress, and probably defeat, end quote. Tell me a little bit about this for you, your experience with having to kind of get over what you had planned for your daughter.
Very honestly, because I had had a mental illness and I just like felt it from her and was an empath. I've been always, and I'm kind of realistic, right? Like that's just how my mind works. Like I'm not sort of like, oh, she'll be over it. It's just a stage. It's just not how I am. It's not how I think. And my husband's realistic too, but it took him a lot longer because he did not want to settle on the fact that the expectations he had for his kids were not going to be met, right? So, and I hear it a lot from people. There's sort of that denial that, oh, it will go away or it'll get better. It's just a phase or a stage. And it's really coming to the, acceptance that this is part of your life, and mental illness is forever something that you have to manage. And wow, wouldn't it be great that we sent Chloe off for 2.5 years, right? She comes back and she's all fixed and better, but it's just not the reality. She starts to slip into those old habits and thoughts that she's had before. And it's our job to try to kind of steer her back and get her back on track. Even for myself, I can catch myself, and you probably do too, getting into sort of those unhealthy thinking patterns that, get me down, especially when I'm struggling with whatever it may be, work or, Chloe or my husband or whatever it may be, that I really have to check in with myself. What do I need to do to keep myself healthy? Which one of the things in the book I talk about is HALT, never get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Tired for me, I take naps all the time, so that's not usually an issue. Hungry, I really keep on top of my hunger too. I have snacks all the time. Angry probably is one that I press down, but lonely is a huge one for me. I need to have my girlfriend time, and that is where I have found sort of the joy in my life. But yeah, finding how to, I guess, just manage what your normal is in your family and for your child, and helping them find that, it's so hard anyways in life, I think, much less if you've got a mental illness or you're struggling with something.
What do you tell a parent who is just grappling with this, grappling with the fact that they've got to let go the dreams of college or the dreams of being a doctor or a lawyer? What are the words you use to help them, to lift them up?
For me, life is all about being as happy as you can and trying to enjoy the moments that you can. And I'm always like, what's the point of demoralizing, your child or demoralizing someone when they can't help it. Don't you want to try to help them be as happy as they can be? To me, it's like, what a lot of energy and time wasted if you're trying to fight that. Like, it's just, it's such a negative feeling.
Help them be successful with the tools they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I might not know the tools, but like, go and see if we can find them tools that they need,
It's hard to talk about mental illness because you talked about it on a spectrum, and this is just a huge amount of different kind of brain health issues different people can have. And it is such a huge spectrum that it's hard to really like talk about tangible tips, really.
Right.
But I love Holt. That's what it is. Holt, right? Hungry.
Yeah, Holt. Okay.
So tell me a little bit about Holt, and then if there's any other tangible tools anyone listening could kind of bring into their own home with their own children.
Yeah. So the Holt is actually good for anybody, right? Any of us, those also who don't have a mental illness, because Holt stands for hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And those are triggers of, depression, anxiety, just severe mood changes. I mean, I think everybody's experienced when they're starving, how just like it says on, the Snickers commercials, you get hangry, right? So it's the same idea. So the Holt, the idea around that is never get too hungry for H, angry, lonely, or tired. Because with the angry piece, if you're not, a lot of times I think people, when they're not expressing themselves and their emotions or disappointments or whatever it may be, they bottle all of that anger up, and that can be toxic, on the body. And then, as I said, with the lonely, even for people who are introverts, everybody needs that socialization, right? Like, we know the kids we see in orphanages 10,000 miles away who are 10 years old and weigh 60 pounds because they're never touched. You know what I mean? It's just that social context of it. And then the tired piece, obviously, again, it's used as a torture mechanism. So, we need to make sure that we take care of ourselves and get plenty of rest and listen to our bodies. I think the other tip that I would give, and it's really super hard to do when you're in the moment of crisis, or just with the behavior of kids sometimes, and we fall back into old patterns as well. But there's a doctor, his name is Ross Greene, Greene, and he has developed this collaborative proactive solutions. It's called CPS model. And it's basically his premises, which is mine, is that kids and people in general do not want to behave badly, right? They're doing so because they're lacking or lagging skills to help them do better. If they could, they would. Like, no one wants to, behave badly. They've gotten lost in how, in skills that they don't have, or the way they've been doing things, et cetera, et cetera. So he's got a whole system of trying to help people identify what these lagging skills are, and also just working with kids and people who struggle emotionally or behaviorally, and taking it more from an empathetic approach. So there's kind of three, types of parenting. There's that top down, which is how I grew up and how my husband grew up, but it did not work for Chloe. For her, we've got to kind of include her in the conversation and ask lots of questions. So that would be a big pointer that I would say to parents, is ask questions. So instead of saying, you didn't get your homework done and you're so lazy and, you're never gonna be able to watch TV again or be on your phone, that you say, gosh, you seem like something like, you seem like you've really been struggling with your homework the last couple of days, or, is everything okay? What's going on? So kind of asking more open-ended questions that involves, and we have really learned with Chloe, when we get to that with her, I mean, it has helped us tremendously, and it builds trust and rapport. instead of sending the kid out the door, right? So I think that would be one of the biggest things, is really just utilizing questions and empathy. Research Ross Green, he's got some great tools on his website as to how to identify what your kids' lagging skills are, and then how you go about helping them overcome.
That's great. And I'll link that in the show notes. Before we move on from this, I just want to testify of Holt, because I have only had 2 really big episodes of my OCD. It's pretty manageable day to day. I'm fine. I'm a high achieving OCD person.
Right.
But when I think about one of the major times I really struggled was when my child was in the OCD and I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't communicating with my husband because I was worried about this child. I was angry about everything going on.
Right.
And it was a very difficult time for me because of the OCD.
Yeah, no, totally. And
it
triggers it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Whenever those stressors happen, it's like you almost have to be more vigilant about Holt, right? I mean, keep your sleeping schedule, keep your eating schedule. I mean, you really do, because you're just, dealing with your own crises.
Yeah, and I had never heard of that. And so when I read that in your book, I was like, oh my goodness.
I know.
There it is.
Good one. Yeah.
That's why that happened. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is anxiety, specifically in our children, because it's so prevalent today. You talk about the technology. Tell me a little bit about it here.
Social media is something that comes up over and over again. And what I found through my research is that there's been quite a bit of research done on social media and how they're relating long-term use of social media and devices with kids getting more anxious and depressed. And I think if you've got any friends who are teachers, I've got a few, that have been in the school system for 20, 25 years, they're like, oh my gosh, it's like night and day now, right? The kids back in the day, for example, were so much easier to manage and they behave better. Now they're, all squirrely, and half of them are anxious and oversensitive. And what they've seen in these studies is that again, coming back to that human interaction and connection, our community connection, is because it's not there. And they're just getting the information from their device. And also, I don't know if you've ever heard, Danielle, but they do say that when you're looking at your Facebook or your Twitter or your Instagram, that you're actually receiving kind of endorphins. It's almost like they're on crack, which is really scary. So it's this constant gratification, but at the same time, you're also seeing these other kids in their perfect lives, right? When especially during a time with kids, there's so much brain development going on, and with teenagers, that self-identity that's happening as well, they're just finding it's really hampering it, and it's scary. I just, feel like it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. What can we do to tighten that up? And it feels like a little out of control, because it's, we all have our devices that we're doing, and it's easy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
With your kids, to be able to put them in front of a device or a TV or whatever it may be, when you're exhausted and you're working and whatever, you've got challenges in your own life.
So you mentioned the community. You mentioned it a little bit earlier on. How did you create a community within your home?
Well, I'm super lucky to have my parents and in-laws in town. And then I have got some really close friends in town as well. So just really relying on people who gave me support that I felt like was a positive, healthy support, not shaming, but positive, healthy support, that I surrounded myself with those people. And then we kind of fed that back into our family as well. So always trying to keep us, kind of socialized and out and about, and especially with people who get it or got it during that time. Because I had some friends who had their own children that were going through struggles. And it just is so, just relieving, or helps so much when you've got someone who understands what you've been going through.
Yeah.
So I think just keeping ourselves surrounded with our family and keeping them involved. I've been really fortunate to create community with them and be able to bring us, always back to that family value.
What has been the response to your book? You put this book out. How are people responding to you?
Really positive. I mean, from, pretty much everybody that I know that has seen it is just really, I guess, gracious and grateful that I put it out there, just because not a lot of people talk about mental illness. And I've sort of, outed our whole family with it over the last 5 years or so. But people are thankful, because they just feel like it's kind of inspiring and might help someone else, or help kind of a next step as to, keeping a conversation going, which is what I'm hoping I can do with the book. Use it as a platform for kind of advocacy and education and such.
Mm-hmm. I like that it's such a guide. Like there's information about anything you could be concerned about your child kind of showing signs of. You can just read through each different type of mental illness, along with the symptoms, along with what to expect, along with different types of treatment, along with different mental illnesses they may experience because of it. It's so comprehensive, and I really liked that about this book.
Oh, thank you.
I had one woman ask a question on Facebook she wanted to ask you. Darlene she's asking about the kids in her life, the teenagers in her life, and she says, do kids with bipolar disorder grow out of it?
No.
No, not possible. It's easy, yes or no. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there can be, if they truly have a diagnosis of bipolar, they're going to have to manage that the rest of their lives, with probably medication and therapy. I think that there are instances, for example, especially like with depression and postpartum, with women who have had babies, or maybe while they are pregnant, getting really depressed, and then being able to take an antidepressant after they give birth for only, like a year, and then being able to go off it. Like, it helps them even out their hormones or the chemicals in their body. But bipolar is pretty significant. So, you really want to make sure that you're under a doctor's care and staying on top of it and managing it. I mean, really careful with the medication too, because what happens too with meds is if you go on and off of them too much, they become ineffective for the body. Like your body just like, it's like, it doesn't work anymore. So you'll have to, so it's just, it can be dangerous, one, and two, it just can be ineffective.
She also wanted to know if it's genetic.
Yes. So definitely in our family, I had a great uncle who had bipolar, and I've got some aunts who've got some anxiety. Both my sisters have anxiety and depression. And then I had a great grandmother who had major depression. And so for sure, hereditary. I do know that it can be circumstantial as well. So people who have gone through trauma, maybe abuse in the home or sexual abuse or drug use, can cause changes in the chemicals or DNA of the brain.
Your book is called On the Edge, which I think a lot of people who are experiencing children with mental illness are probably like, that's how I feel on a daily basis.
Exactly.
And then it continues, help and hope for parenting children with mental illness. What is the hope part of this?
I don't ever want to give up hope and think that I can't help Chloe come to a point where she's going to be happy with herself and like at peace, with herself. I mean, I guess there's a little bit of restlessness with everybody, but I just believe for her and for myself and for our society and community, I think that there's a lot of hope to be had with we can do better and coming together and helping to give more stability and support to people with mental illness and maybe, decrease some of the other issues we have in society.
Get ahead of it instead of reactive, like you've talked about. Okay, last question, because this podcast is all about finding more joy in the everyday. Tell me your tip to finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in-between. What's the number one tip to finding more joy in your life?
For me, it's friends, for sure. People. I have to lean on people to help me, get through and find joy and laugh.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's great advice. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. I loved the book. I think you did a really nice job with it, and I am excited to share this conversation and share some of your wisdom.
Awesome. Thanks, Danielle.
Andrea's real mission in all of this, if you couldn't tell, is to help other people. I have linked her resources in the show notes. Go check those out. If you know someone who could use her advice, go ahead and send this episode their way. I want to thank you for being here on Happiness in Progress.